Oh, good morning, everybody. Good morning, good morning, good morning to all my visitors, all my regulars, and everybody in between. This is Trev from Trevessence, and today we're going to continue the reading of the book Twice in a Lifetime by Dorothy Garlock. For those of you who have been with me, I hope you have been enjoying the reading of this book as much as I have been enjoying bringing it to you. Now, today we are going to continue with chapter 20. If you were here last night, you would have heard where Clara and Drake are, their love is getting more intense. Let's just say, um, Eddie has made it a part of his duty to go see Drake and let it be known to Drake that he is in love with Clara. He has offered Drake quite a bit of money for him to leave town and leave Clara alone. But Drake has downrightly refused. And also, he's at this moment contemplating whether or not, well, not even contemplating whether or not, he has decided that he's going to use his life savings to rescue Clara from her financial woes. He's going to have to pay off her house so that they could get rid of Eddie, who is trying to blackmail her into being with him in order to save her house. And that's where we're at in the story. So if you haven't been following us, you may want to go back and listen to the playlist so you can catch up. But until then, we are going to move on. And we are on to chapter 20. Why in heaven's name are you still here? Clara thought of her mother's words as she turned her truck onto Main Street, struggling to shift gears. Up ahead, the setting sun was still high enough to shine in her eyes, forcing her to raise her hand for shade. Another day in Sunset was ending. Families would soon sit together to eat dinner, to talk about work and school, to share a laugh. But not Clara's. Hers was as troubled as always. Once Drake left to look for Tommy, Clara had gone back inside to wait for her mother to wake. She had expected Christine to agree with her, to understand her reasons for staying behind, especially after the accidental fire. She had been dead wrong. Stop worrying about me, Christine had scolded. All you should be concerned with is Tommy. Drake is out looking for him. Then get in your truck and do the same. Two sets of eyes are twice as good as one. So get going. And so Clara had been shooed out of the house. While Tommy had been absent longer than this before, even angrier from time to time, something about this felt different to her, more foreboding. Her heart raced faster, sweat slicked her palms, and her nerves felt frayed. She couldn't have said exactly why, but she desperately needed to know that her son was safe. My sister M&G is here. How are you doing, my love? Happy morning to you, my darling. And it's always a pleasure seeing you, my love. I just love you. Mwah. Love your happy presence and your happy spirit. I just love you, my darling. Thank you all so much for coming, guys. Don't forget to hit the like button and don't forget to share out the live. Invite your friends to come on over. This is a morning thing. Every morning we read over here because reading is healthy. Let us move on. Because she had sent Drake to look at Wilbur Marsh's tavern, the most likely place to find her son, Clara checked there first. She drove past his school, wondering when Tommy had last attended. She checked at Dog Waters Pond, a watering hole on Millicent Grange's property, where Tommy and his friends used to swim when they were younger. Clara passed the post office, the bakery, the movie theater, everywhere she could think he might be. But so far, she hadn't found him. In the end, it was as if Tommy had vanished. So here she was, making her third trip down Main Street, still looking, refusing to give up. But this time, something was different. Nearing the tavern, she noticed Drake's car parked in the lot. Clara considered stopping, her foot hovering over the brake. She imagined that Drake was inside, talking with Tommy. The thought made her heart pound. But just as quickly as the impulse arrived, it passed. If if her son was there, the last thing he'd want would be for his mother to come walking through the front door. She drove on. She would leave this to Drake. Besides, as the day had gone on, Clara had felt more and more clearly that there was one more place she had to go, one more person she had to talk to, and she couldn't wait any longer. For a moment, Drake saw stars. Now we are moving on to the time. You remember that the guy in the bar had smacked Drake in the face. Okay, so here it is. For a moment, Drake saw stars. The first punch had clipped his chin. At the last possible instant, he had turned his head, keeping the damage from being even worse. But the blow had still been enough to knock him down. His glass flew from his hand. It fell onto the floor and shattered into pieces. Stunned and disoriented, Drake tried to shake the cobwebs loose. Get it together! Get it together quick! No sooner had Drake looked up than the other man was back on the attack. The brute raised a booted foot, determined to bring it crashing down on his head and end the fight before it even began. Drake rose quickly to one knee, closing the distance between them while twisting to one side. The kick whizzed past his head, an inch from its intended target, and slammed hard onto the floor. Without hesitation, Drake threw a short punch into the soft flesh at the small of the man's back. The goon let out a sharp bark of pain and moved away, angry and surprised that his seemingly bested victim had managed to fight back. Drake rose to his feet, his head slowly clearing. We don't have to do this, he said, wondering if he still had a chance to talk the other man down. He didn't. Go to hell, his attacker snarled, then charged. Snapping out a sharp jab, Drake punched his opponent's nose, feeling it crunch and sending blood spurting everywhere. But it wasn't enough to keep the other man at bay. The brute slammed into him, driving him into the bar and forcing the air from his lungs. Chairs and patrons scattered. One punch struck his ribs, then another. An elbow cut his cheekbone. The blood left a hot, wet trail down his face to go along with the pain. But Drake wasn't about to fall. Not again. He hadn't started this fight, but he sure damn well was going to finish it. Drake gave the thug a hard shove in the middle of his chest, forcing the man back and giving himself some room. He took a small step forward, put his weight on his front foot. You like to talk about front foot and back foot. Putting his weight on his front foot, and with all the strength he could muster, smashed his fist into the opponent's jaw. Sharp pain shot from his hand down his arm, but he ignored it, hitting the man again and again, on his jaw, deep into his stomach, and once again in the nose. The man wobbled like a chair missing a leg. Some of my bitch, the goon mumbled through busted lips. Bloody saliva leaked down the front of his shirt. But the brute wasn't finished yet. He reared back up, nearly toppling over, and threw a haymaker that Drake easily dodged. With his opponent completely off balance, it was a simple matter for Drake to grab the man's shoulder and spin him around. He cocked his hand and threw a hard, heavy punch that landed flush with the side of the brute's face. The man fell, not slowly like a tree, but more like a load of bricks, quickly and with a lot of clatter. 1 second he was upright, the next he was flat on his back. His eyes fluttered once, twice, then fell shut and still. Drake didn't let his guard down. Even though his body ached, he looked quickly around the bar, expecting another attack from some tough or drunk from some tough or drunk who wanted to keep the brawl going. But no one moved. Every face in the place was turned towards him. He noticed expressions of disbelief, most likely those who couldn't believe he had won. Some were entertained, their mouths curled in devilish grins. There were even a few who looked embarrassed by their own curiosity, turning away quickly when they caught Drake's eye. Even the couple at the jukebox had stopped kissing to watch, still wrapped in each other's arms. The music playing beneath them, the only sound in the bar besides his own fevered breathing. But it was the bartender's reaction that surprised Drake the most. While everyone else in the bar was dumbfounded, the man who ran in calmly grabbed another glass, filled it with beer, and sat it on the counter. I reckon you could use this, he said. When Drake reached into his pocket to fish out a few more coins, the bartender waved him off. No charge. Everybody's afraid of Drake now. Drake has shown himself to be a bad boy again. Much obliged, Drake answered. He grabbed the beer and took a deep draw, wincing because of his split lip. But the drink was worth the discomfort. When he finished, Drake took another look around the bar. Nothing had changed. Standing there, every eye in the place still on him, he understood he couldn't wait for Tommy here. Though the bartender had extended a favor, a compassionate act for the victor, he was a stranger in Sunset nonetheless. Even if there weren't splatters of blood down the front of his shirt, he stood out like a sore thumb. To stay would be risky. He had to return to Clara without her son. When he left, the sound of voices returned. The silence went with him. Clara drove into the cemetery. The sun hung just below the treetops, painting the clouds a deep, dark orange, a color like rust. A pair of crows was a pair of crows was startled by her sudden arrival, flapping their wings as they leaped from tombstones, cawing loudly to voice their displeasure at being interrupted. For hours she had been looking for Tommy, from one side of town to the other, out into the countryside, at every place she thought her son might be, returning to some in order to check again, but there had been no sign. Through it all, Clara had felt the pull of the cemetery. She had ignored it for as long as she could. So when she had finally surrendered and decided to go, she had told herself that she was just being thorough. After all, Tommy had been there recently, getting arrested for allegedly breaking a tombstone. But deep down, Clara knew there was another reason, one that has everything to do with Drake McCoy. Lost in thought, she drove down the same path she always took, meandering along the creek, shadowed by trees. At the next intersection, she braked to look towards where the last time she was there, workmen had been loading the broken stone. The space remained empty, the identity of the deceased known only to the family he or she had left behind. Clara moved on. Up another short hill, she pulled over and shut off the engine. She stared out the dirty windshield at Joe's grave. Her heart raced. It was hard to believe she had been here only a few days earlier to mark the anniversary of Joe's death. So much had changed in that short time. Since Drake had come into her life, she wasn't the same person. With his decision to stay in Sunset, to remain by her side, things would undoubtedly change even more. Because of that, in her heart, Clara had known she had to come here to try to explain it all to Joe, her dead husband, the first man she had given her heart. She had to tell him that she was falling in love with another man. For more than 9 years now, Clara had been alone. Suddenly, unexpectedly, a man had come along. But to accept Drake into her life, she knew that she needed to make peace with her past. She would never forget Joe or even stop loving him, but she had to stop mourning. Holding their memories too close wouldn't allow her to make new ones. Just thinking about what she had to do, what she had to say now, brought tears to her eyes. Oh, poor Clara. She opened the truck door and got out. When she reached Joe's plot, she got down on one knee and placed a hand on the stone. Joe, Clara said, her voice cracking, we need to talk. Drake crossed the parking lot and headed for the Plymouth, gravel crunching beneath his feet. Absently, he ran a hand across his already bruised chin, tender from the punches he had taken. Reaching inside his mouth, he wiggled an aching tooth, wondering if it didn't feel loose. He wasn't a vain man, wouldn't have had time calling himself handsome. But after what had just happened, he could only imagine what he'd look like in the morning. Hopefully, Clara wouldn't find it too hard to look at him. Try as he might, Drake couldn't figure out why the brute had attacked him. He hadn't seemed drunk. Drake hadn't been flirting with his lady. Out of the blue, the man had demanded the seat, but then, when Drake agreed to surrender it, he had thrown a punch. It didn't make any damn sense. He had seen plenty of brawls before, some born out of family feuds, others from some version of love gone wrong or another, plenty on account of too much drink. However, most of them had had a reason, no matter how misguided. Drake shook his head. There wasn't much point in thinking about something he wasn't ever going to understand. But then, just as he was fishing his keys from his pocket, he saw something that made him pause. Another row of cars passed the Plymouth. The bar's parking lot ended up against an empty lot. On the far side, a dirt road fronted a row of rundown houses, one with an upstairs window busted out and dark. It looked like the building was winking. But that had caught Drake's attention was a person walking quickly down the road, a man with his hands stuffed in his pockets. As Drake watched, the figure stepped out of the growing shadows, lengthening by the second as the sun slowly but steadily descended. His face turned up to the weak light for only an instant. Drake hadn't gotten a long look, but it had been enough. It was Tommy. Drake was sure of it. He hurried after him, determined not to let Clara's son out of his sight. Tommy! He shouted, but the kid didn't stop. Was it Drake's imagination, or had he quickened his step? Still aching from the bar brawl, Drake moved as quickly as he could, ignoring the pain. But before he could catch up, the figure turned down a narrow alleyway between two buildings. Moments later, Drake did the same, but he immediately had to stop to keep from running into someone. Watch it, fellow, a surprised voice yelled. In the murky gloom, Drake couldn't make out the man's features. He helped Drake out by stitching a match, cupping his hands, and lighting a cigarette. Before he shook out the flame, Drake got a good look, beady little eyes that made him resemble a rat, along with a crooked nose, probably broken a time or two. He wasn't Tommy, but was he the man Drake had been following? His clothes looked about right, but that didn't mean much. The same was true for his size. Maybe Drake had imagined the resemblance to Tommy. He had wanted to find Clara's son so badly that his mind convinced him that the man was someone he was not. Maybe the punches he had taken during the fight were worse than he thought. Then again, maybe he had seen Tommy. Drake peered down the alley. With the disappearing light, it was like looking into a deep well. He couldn't see clearly more than 20 feet in front of his face. Did someone just come past here? Drake asked. The man took a deep drag on his cigarette, his eyes narrowing. You looking for trouble? He growled. Drake thought about pressing the issue, but instead mumbled an apology and walked away. He had already been in one fight. He didn't need another. Besides, even if it had been Tommy, the boy was long gone by now. Retracing his steps, Drake found he had another surprise waiting for him. A young woman was leaning against his car. Surprisingly, he recognized her. She had been standing behind the bar when he had arrived. He grinned. She grinned too. The look meant to be seductive, as if she was sizing him up. Her arms were folded across her chest beneath her breast, purposely pushing them up and out. Hmm. Guys, you remember that Naomi had said how she was going to try to take Drake from Clara? She was going to try to give Clara hell with Drake? Huh. Here she is now. Here she is. Hmm. Decide to go for a walk? She asked. I thought I'd get a breath of fresh air, Drake answered. Good, the woman replied as she pushed off the Plymouth and closed the short distance between them. You are going to need it. And then she kissed him. What in the holy mackerel did I just read? Damn, this is gonna be fun. Naomi lounged across the car and watched the man make his way across Lou Turklestone's empty lot. She hadn't paid him much attention when he had entered the bar, but when her father said that he was asking about Tommy, everything changed. This was the man Tommy had told her about, the one spending time with his mother, the race car driver named Drake McCoy. It had been simple for Naomi to proposition Chet Miller, a roughneck farmer who spent so much time in the bar that it sometimes felt as if he lived there. He wanted her, just like half the other men in the bar, so he was keen to do whatever she asked. Having to go at Having a go at McCoy was the same as buying her a drink. Holy mackerel. So the person who started the fight with Drake McCoy was Chet Miller, and he was doing Naomi's bidding. Oh my God. Naomi wanted to be entertained, so when Chet walked over and began causing a ruckus, she leaned back against the bar, smiled, and waited for the fun to begin. But then, shockingly, the race car driver had come out on top, and for the second time in a matter of minutes, everything changed. When McCoy left the bar, Naomi had slipped out the side door and followed. She stayed a safe distance behind him, trying to keep from being noticed, at least until she wanted to be seen. She licked her lips, adjusted her bra, and wished that she had squirted some perfume on herself. But then, just as she was about to reveal herself, McCoy had hurried across the empty lot. He had shouted something, but Naomi hadn't been able to make it out. Unexpectedly alone, she decided to lean against his car and wait for him to return. While she waited, Naomi thought about what she'd do with the race car driver. Since, since Beast had failed, it was time for Beauty. She wondered how long it had been since McCoy had touched a young woman like her, probably longer than he wanted. No man resisted her for long. Eventually, he would break, bending over backwards to please her. Then, once she was finished having her fun, she'd spread every last salacious detail around town. She had already ensnared Clara Sinclair's son. She wondered how the old widow would feel if she claimed her new man too. Oh my God, Naomi is so wrong. The possibility of such chaos was too delicious for her to ignore. Just then, she noticed McCoy walking back towards her. She smiled, flashing him a look that had won her plenty of men. Decide to go for a walk? She asked with a voice. That's that's pun like honey. Hmm. Ah, boy. Ah, boy. I tell you, this woman is something else. She is really something else. But hold on 1 minute there, guys. Hold on a minute. Hold on just a minute. All right, guys, let us continue on to chapter 21. I've met someone. Clara knelt on the grass that grew above her husband's head, resting a hand on his tombstone. The sun fell steadily, causing shadows to reach across the ground towards her. A breeze rustled the trees, but as idyllic as it was, Clara's thoughts were in turmoil. Her mouth had gone dry and her heart raced. She felt like she was speaking to Joe face to face, revealing something shameful, as if she had done something wrong. His name is Drake McCoy, and she sputtered. She sputtered to a stop, not because she was embarrassed, but rather because she didn't know where to start. How could she possibly describe Drake, what he meant to her, or how he made her feel? Should she talk about how they had met? What words would explain the indescribable feeling of racing down the hill in the Plymouth, her head sticking out the window? What about what about when she'd kissed Drake for the first time? Then there was the way he had rushed into the house they both feared was on fire, willing to risk his life to protect her family. Could she say these things to Joe? In the end, Clara knew she had to, so she took a deep breath and began. I was driving back to the bank one afternoon when the truck broke down. The more she talked, always being honest, choosing not to leave anything out, the easier it became. Clara felt no shame for the things she had done with Drake. The opposite was true. Speaking of him, of their time together, talking about the qualities that attracted her to him, made her happy. Ever since you died, my life has been so hard, she continued. The house, my mother's health, the bank, and especially Tommy. Nothing has gone the way I hoped it would. Every year I come here to remember the anniversary of your death so that I can unburden myself. But no matter what I say, nothing ever makes it better. For 9 years, I've been so utterly alone. When those men come to the house and told me that you had been killed, right then and there, I gave up. I swore to myself that there would never be another man, that I would be a widow, and that would be that. But I was fooled. I had no idea what lay ahead of me. But then Drake came along, and everything I thought I knew got turned upside down. Clara told Joe about how the race car driver made her feel, about his smile, the sound of his laughter, even the strong, confident way he drove his car. The more she thought about it, the more Clara realized that the two men had much in common. Both were strong, proud, and willing to put a stranger's needs above their own. She imagined she imagined that had all their lives been different, Drake and Joe might very well have been friends. Drake makes me happy. You don't need to worry about me. With those words, Clara began to cry. She supposed that, in a way, one door was opening while another was being shut. I will never forget you, Clara said tearfully. All I ever wanted was your love, to raise a family, to spend the rest of our lives together, but we can't. She paused, marshalling herself for the words that still needed to be said. When we got married, I promised to love you until death would us part, a vow I'd continue to keep for 9 years. Part of me will keep it forever, but things need to change. My memories won't ever go away, but it's time for me to make new ones. I can't keep living in the past. I know you wouldn't want me to. Clara believed it. If anything, Joe would have been annoyed that she had waited so long. He would have wanted her to be happy. I don't know how it happened, she said, smiling through tears, but I found love twice in a lifetime. Suddenly, a loud caw startled her. Clara looked up to see two crows circling above her, gliding effortlessly through the darkening sky. She watched, spellbound, as they landed on a tombstone 2 rows from where she was. She couldn't have known for certain whether they were the same birds she had spooked when she entered the cemetery, but she suspected they were. She watched them intently as they stared back at her. Then both birds cawed noisily before one flew off, its wings flapping furiously as it soared across the river before disappearing into the thick woods beyond. The other remained where it was, its beady eyes never leaving her. Clara trembled. This was a sign. She was sure it was. In her heart, she believed that Joe was looking down on her. He was giving her his approval for what she had told him, for her feelings for Drake. The lone crow cawed, but it didn't fly away. She smiled, crying tears of joy, and said the only thing she felt. Thank you. What in the hell? Drake couldn't move. The last thing he'd expected was for the young woman to kiss him, yet that was just what she had done. Her boldness stunned him. So here he was in the tavern's parking lot, the Plymouth a car length away, its keys dangling in his hand, with the arms of someone he didn't know wrapped around his neck, her lips pressed against his. Mmm, she purred into his mouth. What a little wretch. Drake finally shook off his surprise. He grabbed the woman by the arms and pried her loose. He pushed her away a little harder than he had intended, causing her feet to skid in the gravel. Strangely, she didn't seem bothered. In fact, his rejection appeared to excite her all the more. Her eyes narrowed, and she smiled mischievously, with only a hint of teeth showing. Don't do that, Drake warned. He fought down the urge to wipe his lips with the back of his hand. Come on now, she replied. You enjoyed it while it lasted. Just think of all the things we can do if we get in the back seat of your fancy car. No thanks. Don't you find me pretty? If Drake were to give an honest answer, it would be yes. She was at age where she was just beginning to understand how seductive her looks could be. Everything about her would catch a man's eyes. The curve of her hips, the color and curl of her hair, the way her blouse had been unbuttoned just far enough to reveal a hint of cleavage. Even her voice, honeyed and deep at the same time, sort of like Greta Garbo's, tugged at that part of tugged at that part of him that was still in his teens and twenties, back when he was a skirt chaser, his head on a swivel for the next pretty girl. But he wasn't that boy anymore. It wasn't hard for Drake to see past her beauty and into her dark depths, down to the person she was on the inside. This lady was poison. To become involved with her, even for a night, was a dangerous proposition. Still not interested? She replied coolly. She licked her lips. You could be if you gave me half a chance. You don't even know my name. Drake McCoy, she said with a smirk. You're the race car driver. Again, he was caught off guard. She seemed to have a knack for surprising him. Well then, he managed to recover. I don't know yours. Before she answered, she moved a step closer. I'm Naomi. My father owns this place, she told him, nodding towards the bar, but her eyes never left him. Her name made Drake pause. It was like inserting the right key into a stubborn lock, causing the door to crack open. Naomi, he echoed. Naomi Marsh? That's right, she answered, while still smiling, as if she was pleased at the recognition. She shouldn't have been. Tommy Sinclair's gal? Her expression soured. I'm not anyone's gal, Naomi replied. Not exclusively. Right now, I could be yours. She took another step closer. Like a boulder building momentum as it began rolling down a hill, Drake steadily began to put it all together. Suddenly, what had happened in the bar, especially the unprovoked ball, made a lot more sense now. It was because of you, wasn't it? He asked. You'll have to be a bit more specific. That big lug started to fight with me because you told him to. Guilty as charged, Naomi answered, giving him a wink. I thought for sure that Chet would make short work of you, but I was very wrong. Watching you break him down like you did got my blood up. I figure that if you fight like a wildcat, imagine what you could do in bed. Drake couldn't believe what he was hearing. You are nuts, he said. Naomi laughed like she was really having fun. That that right there is why you interest me so much. You are nothing like the man I've met. They're always after one thing, she explained, slowly running a hand across her body, starting at her hips and ending up at her breast. They lie through their teeth trying to get it, but they don't fool me. Every last one of them is all dick and no brains. Even Tommy? Drake asked. She shrugged. Yeah, even him. Tommy was fun for a while, but a girl like me has needs a boy can't fulfill. I want a man. This time, when Naomi threw herself at him, Drake was ready. He grabbed her by the shoulders, stopping her in mid-air. Once again, he pushed her back, but this time Naomi lost her balance. Her eyes went wide before she landed hard on her backside in the loose stones. Stop it, he told her. You're making a fool out of yourself. How dare you? Naomi shouted. Furious, she scrambled to her feet and stepped towards him, all her sexuality and looks of seduction gone in a flash. Rearing back, she slapped him hard across the face. Drake made no move to stop her, even though his cheek hurt like hell, more from the bar brawl than from her slap. He had allowed her to hit him in the hope that it would get the anger out of her system, but it looked to have been in vain. When she reared back to strike him again, he snatched her by the wrist. Let me go, she screeched. Settle down. Just settle down. It's finished, he told her. Why? Naomi demanded through a storm of tears. Drake couldn't know if her show of emotion was on account of pain, shame, or the frustration of being rejected. It was probably a mixture of all three. Yanking her hand free, she shouted, Why don't you want to be with me? Drake didn't answer, but instead pushed past her and got in the Plymouth. He turned the key in the ignition and the engine roared to life. Tell me, tell me, tell me, Naomi demanded, her hands balled into a fist. Slowly, Drake turned to look at her, his arm draped over the steering wheel. Even after everything he had been through, the beating he had both given and received, and his fruitless search for Tommy, he still felt pity for Naomi. He imagined that nothing in her future was going to go the way she expected. You've got a hell of a lot of growing up to do, he said before pulling the Plymouth in gear and roaring away. Naomi watched Drake McCoy race his fancy car out of the parking lot. His tires sprayed gravel before they reached the pavement. Within seconds, his taillights had disappeared into the night, but Naomi stood still there, stunned, starting, staring in disbelief. Absently, she rubbed her wrist where he had grabbed her. It would probably be bruised come morning, along with her along with her rear end. What? What in the hell just happened? In the span of half an hour, she had gone from wanting the race car driver beaten to a pulp to hoping he would tear her clothes off and ravish her. But unbelievably, she was now right back where she started. She wanted him ruined, even dead. Oh Lord Jesus. Naomi is really, really something else, I tell you. And you know, guys, she's not alone. That is oftentimes how some women behave when they think that their looks can get them anything and everything. They use it. They use it to their advantage and the disadvantage of everybody around them. The only silver lining to her rejection was that there wasn't anyone around to see it. If there had been, Naomi thought she would have died from the embarrassment. Never in her life had she been turned down like this. She hadn't thought it possible. No man had ever been able to resist her. She desperately wanted to believe that Drake McCoy's doing so wasn't a mark against her, but rather showed him for a fool. Either way, he had to pay. The only question was how. Suddenly, an idea occurred to her. It was devilish, even a bit dangerous, but that was part of its appeal. If she actually went through with it, a whole lot of people might end up ruined, especially Drake McCoy. With every passing second, Naomi began to believe it was the only choice she could make. When she finished, the race car driver would regret turning her down. Naomi smiled. This time, she showed plenty of teeth. Before Clara got back in her truck, she wiped away a few tears. She stole one last glance at Joe's grave, smiling easily. One story had ended while one was beginning. It was time to look forward. I'll never forget you. I promise. Now that night had arrived, Clara turned on the truck's headlights, managed to start the engine, and followed the road back towards the cemetery's entrance. Above her, the moon had climbed high enough to reflect off the creek. Birds dipped and swooped, devouring bugs. She drove past rows of tombstones before pausing at the cemetery's gate. But then, just as she began to pull out onto the main road, Clara pressed the brakes. To her left was a sharp bend, tight enough for the road to quickly disappear from sight. To make matters worse, a weeping willow's branches drooped low to the ground, further blocking her view. Suddenly, without warning, a car roared around the bend, racing right towards her. Clara gasped. Even though it was almost pitch black out, the vehicle had its headlights turned off. In seconds, the car reached her. It honked as it passed by, missing her by just an inch. Clara gripped the steering wheel tightly, her heart pounding. If she hadn't already believed that Joe was watching over her, this would have convinced her. God damn it! Watch where the hell you're going! Sweetwoods swiveled in the back of the Cadillac to look out the rear window. The truck they had just missed dwindled in the darkness. He had been half asleep when Malcolm suddenly jerked the wheel to the side, and he had been pressed up against the door, forced awake and plenty angry. It's as much our fault as theirs, Jessie said, slumped in the passenger seat. Driving like we are with our headlights off. I can't see fine, Malcolm grunted from behind the wheel. Ain't a matter of your eyes, but theirs. For a matter of a mile further, they rode in darkness, Sweet still sweating a blue streak from the back seat. But then Malcolm flipped on the Cadillac's headlights. He did so just in time to illuminate the sign that announced their arrival in Sunset. Oh, Lord Jesus. Now Sweet is in Sunset. Drake and Amos are in Sunset, things are about to get really ugly. Because remember, Sweet is the drug dealer from whom Amos stole the money and the morphine. And now Sweet has been looking for them for a long time. Now they are in the same town. Lord Jesus, let's see what's going to happen. We heading straight to the hotel? Jesse asked hopefully. Sweet shook his head. I want to check out this shithole town. Shithole. Where did I hear that term before? I want to check out this shithole town. Look for some sign of Barstow, McCoy, or that car of theirs. Might be easier than we expect. But if we don't see 'em, then we get a room, right? Sweet smirked. He knew that Jesse hated sleeping in the Cadillac. Though the man with a stone cold was a stone cold killer, he was also a bit of a dandy, with his nice clothes and carefully coiffed hair. He would prefer sleeping in a bed, even the kind found in some two-bit dive, to roughing it in the Cadillac. Oh my God. We'll just pull off the road and catch a few hours, the drug dealer answered, only because he wanted to piss off the other man. Jesse groaned. Malcolm didn't care a bit. Come morning, Sweet continued, we'll ask around and see if anyone's seen them. They might have passed through a week back. And if no one's seen 'em? Jesse asked, clearly annoyed that he was going to spend another restless night sleeping in the cramped car. Then we keep looking, Sweet answered as he leaned back in his seat. Ever since they had left St. Louis, he had had only one goal, to find that son of a bitch named Barstow. Sweet wouldn't rest until he got back everything that had been stolen from him. The mechanic would pay. And so would anyone stupid enough to be mixed up with him. Oh my. Well, there's gonna be hell to pay. And that's the dangerous game of drugs and money. Let us continue into chapter 22. This is going to be the last chapter for today. Clara had just shut the pickup truck's door when the Plymouth pulled into the driveway behind her. She peered through the windshield at the passenger seat, hopeful that Drake would have Tommy with him. But he was alone. For a long while he stayed behind the wheel, staring out at her, before finally shutting off the engine and getting out. It was then, just as Clara was about to ask him what he had found, that Drake stepped into the meager light of the bulb above her side door. She gasped at what she saw. His face was covered in bruises, dark and mottled. The corner of his mouth and one eye was swollen badly. His cheek had been cut, dried blood stained his skin. He smiled at her, trying to downplay his injuries, but doing so caused him to wince. What happened? Clara asked, rushing to him, her hand rising to his face, where it hovered. She was afraid to touch him. Drake shrugged. It's no big deal, he told her. I just had a disagreement with some guy about which of the Andrews sisters was the best singer. He swore by Patty, but I've always been partial to Laverne. Hmm. Clara knew that his attempt at a joke was for her sake, to put her at ease, but the sight of his battered face made her feel sick to her stomach. She grabbed his arm. Come inside so I can clean you up. Drake shook his head. You don't have to. You don't have to. It's not that bad, he said. Besides, you should see the other guy. Without a word, she pulled at him. Drake offered only the slightest resistance before giving in and following. Clara sat him down at the kitchen table. Under the brighter light, his wounds looked even worse. If Drake was correct and he had gotten the better of the fight, then Clara felt sorry for whoever was going to have to tend to his opponent. She wet a washcloth and gently wiped away the dried blood on his face and hands. Drake flinched the first couple of times she touched him, but he refused to turn away or complain. I'm going to go get some things, she told him. Don't move. Hurts too much for that, he said with a weak smile. In the upstairs bathroom, Clara gathered what she would need: some bandages, alcohol to disinfect his cuts, and a pair of scissors. The whole time, her mind raced, wondering what had actually happened. Who had Drake fought? Did it have anything to do with Tommy? All she wanted was to ask Drake questions until he told her the truth. But deep down, Clara knew she had to trust that he would tell her in due time. Before she went back downstairs, Clara checked on her mother. Christine's door was open as they agreed, but she was sleeping. Her nightstand light was on, a book laying across her stomach. Clara was glad. She wanted to be alone with Drake. Back in the kitchen, Clara sat facing him. She poured alcohol into a clean cloth and prepared to properly clean his wounds. This is going to sting, she told him. Drake smirked. Worse than what you were doing before. Excuse me. Probably. When she touched the cloth to the angry red cut on his cheek, his reaction, a quick spasm and tightening of his jaw, told Clara she might have been right. Once she finished putting the last bandage on the row of small cuts crisscrossing his bloodied knuckles, Clara sat back. No more jokes, she said. Tell me what happened. He nodded and took a deep breath. Drake told her about all the places he had looked for her son, roaming across town, and about how he had gone to the tavern as she had suggested. He recounted how he had gone inside, ordered a beer, and sat down at the bar to wait to see if Tommy would show up. The next thing I knew, someone starts a fight with me. Who was it? Clara asked. Some big lug, tall and wide as a mountain, with hands the size of canned hams, ornerier than a hound dog with a soup bone. I had to stop there, guys, because I've never seen this word before. Ornerier. Ornerier. I gotta mark because I gotta look it up. Ornerier than a hound dog with a soup bone. She thought for a moment. That sounds like Chet Miller. He's there so much that I'm surprised they don't make him pay rent. Drake rubbed his jaw. He didn't seem interested in introductions. He just started a fight with you for no reason? That's what I thought at the time. But later I found out otherwise. What do you mean? Clara asked. I'll get to that. He told her about winning the fight, not in a bragging way, but more in a matter of fact way, admitting that he could just as easily lost. Still un, still unsteady on his feet, he had left the bar, but then, when he was almost to the Plymouth, he thought he saw Tommy. When he ran after him, he hadn't been able to catch up. After that, I headed back to the car, he told her. But when I got there, I found a young woman leaning against it. Clara tensed. She wanted to ask who it was, but couldn't find her voice. She had a sneaking suspicion that she already knew. It was Naomi, he confirmed, the girl I've heard so much about. What? What did she want? That's the same question I had, Drake answered. But before I could ask, she did something I hadn't figured out yet. What was that? Drake's eyes found hers. She kissed me. You what? You kissed her? Even as Drake had driven out of the tavern's parking lot, he had known that what had happened with Naomi was going to hurt Clara. His fears had been proven to be well founded, but he wasn't going to lie. If the two of them were going to have a strong, secure relationship, it had to be built on honesty and trust. So while Drake knew that he had done nothing wrong, that he had never been tempted by Naomi, convincing Clara otherwise wasn't going to be so easy. Not exactly, Drake corrected her. It's more that she kissed me. Carefully, painstakingly, he explained how Naomi had thrown herself at him, emphasizing that he had pushed her away, rejected her advances. Drake told Clara how he had anticipated her trying to kiss him again, how he had stopped her, and that Naomi had ended up on her backside in the gravel. Finally, he recounted how he had been slapped by her. Hmm. He finished by describing Naomi as he had left her, furiously angry in the middle of the bar's parking lot. Naomi threw herself at you? She asked, trying to piece it all together. She wasn't really interested in me, he answered. Then why did she do it? Because all a gal like Naomi wants is a reaction. The stronger, the better, Drake told her. If she had gotten her mitts on me, if I had been willing, it would have hurt you, and it would have hurt you and Tommy. She would have stirred up a hornet's nest just to be entertained. Then, when the fire then when the fire she lit burnt out, she would have moved on to the next sucker willing to buy what she was selling. Drake could see that Clara was listening to him. She wasn't hearing what he said, struggling to get past the kiss. She searched his face for something, a sign to put her aching heart at ease. When she didn't find what she was looking for, she glanced away. You you weren't tempted? She asked, her voice faint, almost a whisper. She's a pretty girl. Don't you believe me? He asked. Clara turned to look at him. She nodded. It's just that, she began, but her voice trailed off. Drake took her hand. He rubbed his rough, calloused thumb into her palm, feeling her warmth, hoping that his touch was comforting. I'm not a boy, interested in every skirt that comes along, he told her. I haven't been one for a long time. Naomi never had a chance. What I want is something different, something real. He squeezed her hand hard enough to make Clara look him in the eyes. I want you. Nothing will ever convince me otherwise. Wow, that sounds quite lovey-dovey. So I got to pause and take a look in the chat. And there I find Jojo and Winsome, the amazing M and G. How are you all doing, guys? This is some lovey-dovey stuff going on here between Clara and Clara and Drake. Something that makes you something that makes you want to feel jealous of them. Hey, hey. But let's continue, my gentle people. Let's continue. Slowly, Drake leaned forward, lowering his face towards hers. The look in Clara's eyes clearly said that his words had moved her. She showed no hesitation in moving closer, inclining her head so that their lips would meet. At first, the kiss was tender, almost chaste, but it soon grew in intensity. Their mouths opened, their tongues touching, their passion potent enough for him to ignore the ache of the bruises on his face. He considered being cautious and backing away, not giving in to his desire for fear that he was reading the situation wrong, that he was about to make another mistake. But instead, he decided to damn his caution, to live for the moment, to show Clara exactly how he felt. Drake, she moaned into his mouth. Growing bold, Drake grabbed her elbow and pulled her to him. Clara didn't resist. Rising out of her seat, she sat on his knee, wrapped herself in his arms. His hand rose to touch her cheek, tracing the curve of her jaw. Their kiss continued hungrily, as if each of them had been starved for the other's touch. Drake's fingers descended across her shoulder and onto her collarbone. Then he traced the soft underside of her breast. Clara gasped, but didn't move away. But when he lifted her blouse to feel the bare skin beneath, she abruptly broke their kiss and leaned back. Lean back, lean back, hey, lean back. Get it, Clara, get it. Wait, Clara told him breathlessly. What's wrong? He asked, worried that he had gone too far, too fast. Why don't you leave the man alone? This is what you want? She asked. Yes, I do, he insisted. You want to be with me? This way? Oh my God. You gotta understand clues, Clara. You don't have to say a word. He shouldn't have to say a word. Drake nodded. More than I could ever tell you with words. Then we can't do this here. Someone might interrupt us, Clara explained. She got out of his lap, took his hand, and led him to the door. Before Drake could ask where they were going, she stepped into the night. The darkness swallowed her as she hurried towards the garage. Drake followed. As Clara walked from the house to the garage, her heart raced. The night had grown cold, causing the goose flesh on her arms to rise, but she hardly felt it. Drake's kisses and touches had ignited a desire in her that couldn't be extinguished, that she didn't want to put out. Years had passed since she had been touched by a man, but her yearning for such attention had never completely disappeared. Rather, it had hibernated, sleeping until the right man had come along to awaken it. Drake McCoy was that man. When he had pulled her into his lap, Clara had decided that she would give herself to him. If that was what he wanted, clearly he longed for the same. But making love to Drake in her home can come with some risk. Her mother was sleeping upstairs, and while Tommy hadn't been around for days, the thought of him walking in on them was terrifying. Since they couldn't go back to Drake's hotel room because of Amos, that left only one place where they could be alone: the garage. Clara opened the side entrance to the garage. The front doors were still broken and flipped on the bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Where are you going? Drake asked when he caught up. Come with me, she answered. At the back of the garage, a drop cord hung between two beams. Clara pulled it down hard, revealing a folding staircase. Oh, they're going in the attic. After a quick look back at Drake, she began to climb. The room Joe had built above the garage was small and sparsely furnished. A chair and desk were on one side of the room, while a small bed and nightstand sat against the opposite wall beneath the only window. Because of the roof's slant, there wasn't much room to stand. In the summer, it was as hot as an oven, and in the dead of winter, it could feel like an ice box. But now, in the springtime, it was quite pleasant. A decade ago, Joel had used it after a long night of fine-tuning the truck or tinkering at his workbench. He would sleep here rather than risk waking Clara. For what she planned to do with Drake, it wasn't ideal, but it was the only place they could go to ensure that they would be alone. Hey, lovely fellow. Oh my God. Thank you for being here, guys. I'm enjoying the reading, and I hope you all are enjoying it too. Oh, I can't believe we went over the hour, but this is going to be the last chapter for today. Let us continue. Drake immediately understood. He took her hand and led her to the bed. Little light shone through the window or up the stairs, but it was enough for them to see where they were going. Drake leaned down and began to kiss her, tender yet insistent, both of their passions still aroused, and it wasn't long before he began to undo the buttons of her blouse. He was halfway down, the top of her breast revealed, silver in the moonlight, when she stopped him. Drake frowned with no anger or annoyance, but with concern. Clara, Clara. She nodded, but found that she couldn't speak. She didn't know how to tell him what she was feeling. There was no denying that she wanted him. Her body ached for his touch, but as much as she yearned for the physical, she was nearly overcome by emotion. What was about to happen was a turning point in her life. She had had the same feeling when kneeling at Joe's grave, a sense that things were about to change forever. Making love to Drake would set them both on a new course towards some unknown future. It was both exciting and frightening. She knew that she could still stop, even now, but she didn't want to. Every fiber of her body, of her heart, wanted this, needed it. She had made her decision. There was no more looking back. Clara rose on her tiptoes and kissed him. Drake was slow to react, but his hesitance didn't last long. He soon put his hand on her cheek, his fingers sliding back to disappear into her hair, then drew her closer, their tongues touching tenderly. His breath hot in her mouth. Clara was dimly aware that he had resumed undoing her blouse, as if in a trance. She returned the favor, her fingers tugging at his shirt, stumbling over the buttons. What happened next was a blur. One by one, items of clothing were removed. Her blouse, his boots, her skirt, his shirt, her bra, until both of them stood naked before each other. You are the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, he told her. Clara couldn't contain her flush of her flush of excitement and embarrassment and turned away. Look at me. Just look at me, Drake said. She did as he asked and saw that while it was hard for her to accept, hard, they're talking about hard. But anyway, while it was hard for her to accept such a compliment, he had given it honestly, believing every word. Once again, they began to kiss. Drake's hand gently cupped over one of her breasts, holding its weight for an instant before giving it a soft squeeze. Gasping with pleasure, Clara placed a hand on Drake's thigh, then ran her fingers across his skin, rising towards his hip before sliding over, a brushing against his, you know what, almost. Oh my God, guys, let me contain myself here. Should I read that part again? I think I should. Once again, they began to kiss. Drake's hand gently cupped one of her breasts, holding its weight for an instant before giving it a soft squeeze. Gasping with pleasure, Clara placed a hand on Drake's thigh, then ran her fingers across his skin, rising towards his hips before sliding over to brush against his hardness. You know they said the word, but I say hardness. Already stiff with desire and anticipation. Now it was his turn to gasp. Clara. Oh, Clara, he moaned, breathing hard. They sat on the bed together, still kissing. Clara lay on her back, above the wool blanket, staring up into the face of the man she had fallen in love with. A few twinkling stars were visible through the window over his shoulder. She felt as if she was adrift at sea, both unable and unwilling to stop the current from taking her. She closed her eyes and let pleasure wash over her. Though it was obvious that Drake was almost bursting with desire to be inside her, he didn't hurry. Clara trembled as his hands roamed her body. His thumb traced a circle around her nipple. His fingers danced across her rib cage. Whoever enjoyed a book here? The flat of his palm brushed her stomach. Finally, his fingers slid down the inside of her thighs to touch between her legs. Feeling her warmth and wetness, she wanted him as badly as he did her. But while Drake knew she wasn't inexperienced, he was still gentle, increasing in fervor only when she gave him a sign, a moan, the hiss of breath between clenched teeth, the ache, the arching, the arching of her back. Drake, I, I, I just. But before Clara could say more, his mouth found hers, making words unnecessary. Clara spread her legs, and Drake moved between them, holding his body over hers. supporting his weight on strong, muscular arms. She was filled with nervous excitement. He positioned himself, moving until he could enter her, which he did slowly, gently. In seconds, he was all the way inside, filling her. Neither of them moved. She wrapped her arms around his broad back and held on tightly. I love you, he said softly. Clara could only nod as tears of joy filled her eyes. When she had fallen in love with Joe Sinclair, Clara had imagined that there would never be another man in her life. Then Joe had died. For many long years, she was alone, convinced that things would never change. But then Drake McCoy had come to Sunset and enchanted her. Now she had rediscovered intimacy, the touch of a man, and she was overjoyed. Clara had found love again. This time, this time, she hoped with all her heart that it would last forever. Drake began to move, slowly at first. Clara was so excited that he slid effortlessly in and out of her. It didn't take long for him to start going fast, the small bed squeaking in rhythm with their bodies. Their breathing was shallow and came in pants. Sweat beaded on their skin, occasionally falling from Drake's brow to land on her chest. Huge waves of pleasure washed over her, every crest rising higher than the one before. Clara, Drake managed. Drake, I don't know what to say, guys. It feels so good, but she couldn't finish. The words lost as a spasm of pleasure ripped through her, causing her to grab his forearms tightly. Clara's breath was trapped in her throat. She closed her eyes to a feeling of beautiful agony, an ecstasy so powerful that it almost hurt. Clara gasped as Drake kept going, his hips pumping furiously, their bodies coming together again and again, wetly, passionately. He moved in and out of her until finally shuddering to a stop, his body pressed against hers, his arms quaking as his seed spilled, filling her with warmth. Clara peppered his face with kisses. Slowly, he lowered himself to rest beside her. Both of them panted with exhaustion. That was, Drake began. Incredible. Clara finished for the both of them. How was I ever lucky enough to find you? Clara laughed. Drake's brow furrowed. What's so funny? He asked. I was just thinking about where the credit for our being together really belongs. She replied. Where's that? My truck. If it drove like it was just off the assembly line, then we wouldn't be here right now like this. Delia is in the place. Delia, what's up? We are on this last page of chapter 20, chapter 22 of Twice in a Lifetime by Dorothy Garlock. Thank you all so much for coming. For those of you who come in religiously every morning to listen to me read, I sincerely appreciate you all. For those of you who listen after the live is over, I sincerely appreciate you all. And to all my returning travelers, I thank you for your continued support. Let's continue. Now it was Drake's turn to laugh. Crazy as it sounds, I reckon it's true. Lying there, entwined with Drake, truly happy for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara was finally grateful to that old hunk of junk sitting in her driveway. It had been good for something, after all. Clara awoke slowly out of a forgettable dream, her eyes fluttering open. For a brief moment, she didn't know where she was, but her confusion was short-lived. A smile spread across her face. She rolled over on the narrow bed and reached to touch Drake, to feel his warmth, But no matter how much she groped around in the darkness, her hand kept coming up empty. She sat up with a start, worry, worry teasing at the edge of her thoughts. Just then, she heard a board creak on the other side of the room. Clara looked up to find Drake standing at the stairs, fully dressed, peering down into the garage. "What is it?" she asked, whispering. "I heard a car door shut," she answered. "I'm going to go take a look." With that, he descended the stairs, leaving her alone. Clara got out of bed, hurriedly threw on her own clothes, and followed. Stepping out of the garage, the evening's chill making her shiver, she was surprised by what she saw. Frank Oglesby's car was parked behind the Plymouth. The sheriff stood in the bright glare of his headlight, talking with Drake. The driver looked upset. Her heart pounded. Watching them, she was suddenly fearful that the sheriff's unexpected arrival had something to do with Tommy. Maybe he had been arrested again. What if there had been an accident? Walking towards the two men, she silently berated herself, furious that she had chosen her own pleasure over continuing to look for Tommy. "Did something happen?" Clara asked when she reached them. She glanced at Drake and realized that she had misread him. He was angry. She feared the worst, and that was just what she got, although it came in a way she never would have anticipated. "I'm sorry to have to come over like this," the lawman explained, "but it couldn't wait till morning." "What is it? What's so urgent?" Sheriff Oglesby took a deep breath. Mr. McCoy here is under arrest." Oh my God. Guys, I'm going to continue the reading tomorrow, but those of you who have been here listening, you know what that is all about, right, guys? You know what that is all about. That little hussy named Naomi. Naomi is going to make Drake pay for Rosam Boyle because he rejected her. So she, I believe, Mark, you guys, I have not read the book, but from the understanding of what I've read so far, I believe, I don't know if you all agree with me, but this is what I believe. We're going to see if it's true when we read the book further. But I believe that Naomi is mad because Drake rejected her. So she has made a false police report to say that he had grabbed her and he had pushed her down on her backside. And so the sheriff is there to arrest Drake for assault. I bet you. All right. We are going to come back to the reading of Twice in a Lifetime by Dorothy Garlock tomorrow morning at the same time, same place. I thank you all so much for coming in and listening to me read. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much. Oh, okay, okay. Okay, sweetheart. Thank you much. Thank you so much, guys, for coming in. And thank you so much for listening. I hope you all enjoy the reading as much as I enjoy bringing it to you. That's going to be it for today, my friends. Until next time, this is Trev from Travessence, where your journey matters. Have a great day, everybody.